Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There is more information on the website womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by 36,157 people from 160 countries and is supported by 507 organisations from all over the world. We have many volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent, engaged in defending women's rights. Please join us as a volunteer. We also have a membership option and the ability for, or possibility for you to donate if you'd like to help the organisation in promoting this declaration on women's sex-based rights. I'm really pleased today that we have Erin Friday from California, USA. She's from the organisation Our Duty, and she's going to be talking about taking legal action in California and the situation in California. Then we have a video from our WDI French speaking webinar last week of Annie-Ève COLLIN from Canada. And she is a philosopher, feminist and a philosopher, and she does a critique of gender identity politics, and that's going to be in French. Then we're going to hear from Bernadette O Malley, who's going to talk to me about meeting platforms on Zoom and international networking and how Zoom, well, I'm sure other platforms are good as well, but that's the one we use at Women's Declaration International, can help and has helped international sisterhood, and trying to give some tips to people. And then we're going to hear from Nina from Canada, who's here, who many of the regular attendees will know, Nina, because she's a very regular attendee. So she's going to talk about so much for work-life balance in Canada, but also about legislation and a lot of her insights about what's going on in Canada. Erin's daughter was gender confused and has desisted, and Erin's very active in Our Duty and is going to talk to us about the situation in California and what the organisation does and what Erin does as well. So welcome, Erin, and over to you.
Let's start with how I got involved with Our Duty and how I became an activist. And that started with my daughter coming out as transgender about 2.5 years ago. It was, the typical rapid onset gender dysphoria, no indication that she was gender nonconforming or confused at any time in her childhood. In fact, she was, I would say, grossly girly, pink and dresses and, very stereotypical feminine little child, and quite the opposite of me because I was the tomboy. But she got indoctrinated at her school in 7th grade through their sex ed class. And all of her friends, all of 5 of them, came home from the sex ed class and said that they were something on the alphabet, using terms that were well beyond what 11-year-olds should understand. Pansexual, polyamorous were some of the labels that these kids had picked. And that was the entrance point for me to figure out, what was going on at the school. And then about a year later, as COVID was raging, as she was lonely and on her computer all the time, she decided that she was now a boy. And after a 1.5 years of pulling her out of it, which, is a Herculean task with the onslaught of, transgenderism everywhere, especially here in California. You can't walk through a mall without signs of transgenderism at stores, makeup stores. We now even have a store dedicated in our mall to trans rights. Everything that is sold benefits the trans movement. So this is how they make more money. But luckily, I swam upstream. I did absolutely the opposite of what everybody told me to do, and I hit the gender piece pretty much straight on with my child. I held the line And I refused to call her by a male name. I refused to do any of the things that I was advised to do by, the therapists, the mental health people, and even people who had kids who were gender confused, told me to tiptoe around the issue, and I didn't. I went straight in. But she was young, so I could do that. She was only 13. But after that year and a half, which was sheer hell, I mean, it was sheer hell. I mean, I contemplated suicide myself, because watching my daughter die by 8,000 cuts as everyone's cheering this on was excruciating. And once I got her stable, I got angry. I got extremely angry, and I had to turn my anger into action. And I met these wonderful women at Sovereign Women in, I think it was, where we were in Washington State or Oregon. And they were all activists. And I thought you needed superpowers to be an activist. I thought you had to go to school for it. I thought there's some kind of rule book. And it was just some badass women saying no, and doing it in all different ways. And then I stumbled on Our Duty, which is a international group, and it started in the UK. And I'm very grateful for Our Duty, because they didn't tether me to anything. They said, you want to be a co-lead, you want to do anything that you want to do in the United States, go and do it. There were no rules. There was no hierarchy, which freed me to try everything to attack this, gender ideology. So that's how I got involved in activism. I'm a lawyer by trade. No special skills in this, except a willingness to fight and a fearlessness, because I believe that if we are afraid and we stay silent, we are complicit, and we're just adding to the problem. And I know a lot of people are afraid of jobs and losing friends, losing their kids even. You're going to lose your child anyway if you stay silent. Part of, I think, the reason why transgenderism grew so rapidly and so strongly is they told us to be afraid, and we should never be afraid. We should never be afraid when we're protecting women and children. Never. So that's my story in a nutshell. And I'm really pleased to announce that my daughter's 17 and she is back to being comfortable in her body. I'm almost a little bit too comfortable. I wish she wouldn't swing the other way so much. We went from binders to cleavage, but I'll take that any day, the day of the week over the binders. So that's the story. Now, what Our Duty is doing in the United States is a little bit different than what Our Duty is doing across the globe. In the UK, Our Duty is more of a parent support group where parents can go and, share their pain and share their stories together. In the United States, we are an activist group. We already have a really strong parent group in the United States called Parents of ROGD Kids, and they take care of the hand-holding and the kindness. There's other groups called Oasis. They also take care of, when a parent is on the edge of losing their mind. These groups are wonderful. I look at Our Duty as we're the fighters, we're the militia. We're going out there and we're showing up and fighting these bills and reaching across the aisle, because we're nonpartisan. We've got members who are lesbians and we have evangelicals. It doesn't matter. We're all in this fight together. We share that common need and thread to protect kids and protect women, because it's all tied together. It's so important to watch what is happening in this state and all the Western states, because we created this mess. And it has to end here first. So people like to just say California is never going to change. Well, if California never changes, if Oregon never changes, if Washington State never changes, then gender ideology will continue to live. So we have to kill it at its root. And I am so grateful for the women in the UK who really, I think, were at the forefront years ago, or while we were sitting on our hands, kind of watching and not thinking that it would ever get that bad here. So thank you to all the women who have been fighting for years. I had no idea that this was even looming until it walked into my house. So here in California, we're seeing an onslaught of bills to harm women. And the latest one is about, and I call it Get Yourself a Baby. It is a bill that redefines fertility as, or infertility as, anyone who cannot have a child as an individual. I mean, let that sink in for a second. Anyone who can't have a child on their own, which is every human being on the planet, because we can't clone ourselves. But this bill is passing, and it is, of course, going to harm children immensely, because these men who have fetishes about breastfeeding can get themselves a baby, and they can get it paid for by insurance companies. That's what the bill is. Renting a womb is $150,000. Now it will be free. And so this is going to hurt, all the women in California, all the poor women who are desperate to pay their rent. They can earn $50,000 by giving someone a baby, and there's no mental health checks required. There can't be any age discrimination. Let that sink in for a second. Age discrimination. So someone who is 65 can get themselves a baby. And there's no disability discrimination either. So that means someone who is an alcoholic or a quadriplegic can get themselves a baby. And this is one of many, many bills going on in California right now that are just designed to feed men's fetishes and to turn women into machines. That's what we are. We are valued for our body parts. Really quite horrendous. And they're also passing a bill where normally if a woman is beaten and she goes to the hospital, those medical providers are mandated reporters. That means they need to get law enforcement involved. They're passing a bill now that is repealing that. They only need to get law enforcement involved if there was a gun as part of the beating or the woman was shot. That's how much we're not valued anymore. We have to be near death before they'll get the police involved. And the most horrific thing, and this is, the people that are passing these bills, they are all part of the LGBTQ caucus. That means it is lesbians who are passing these bills. They are authoring these bills. Gay men are authoring these bills, which to me is a very frightening aspect of this, because those on the right are going to blame the gay community for this. And it makes it even more imperative for more of the gay community to stand up and be the face of anti-transgenderism. They have to be, because the right's not going to understand that they're that it's not a monolith of gay and lesbian people who are pushing this. So it's really important for every lesbian woman to show up at these hearings and be the face of the battle. So those are some of the really nasty bills that are really affecting women directly. And California is the 5th largest economy in the world. And it is shameful that these hearings and these legislators are not getting onslaughts of phone calls from women saying no, from men saying no. And I don't know how to outreach anymore to get people to light a fire under their rear ends, but people have to stand up. There's no excuse not to stand up at this point. And I do think that I don't know how it is in the UK right now, but it's safe to come out. It's safe to come out in your real name. And then we have more bills in California that are really directed at the kids and feeding the sex trafficking world. There's a bill that is permitting 12-year-olds to opt out of their family's home with no claim of abuse, no claim of self-harm, no claim of harm to others. They can go to a residential facility without any permission from mom and dad. They get to opt in. When would this happen? This is going to happen at the schools. The schools are the pipeline for gender confusion. So you take a 6th grader, 12, goes into their school counselor and says, I think I'm trans. And that counselor will say, well, do you think your parents would approve? And the child says, no, I don't think so. Or would you like to stay at a residential facility? And that 12-year-old doesn't come home from school that day. That 12-year-old goes to a residential facility, which can be run by a community center. Code word for LGBTQ community, actually TQ community center, where that child gets further indoctrinated, where that child then is considered a runaway. The parents will have an indelible mark on their reputation, because why would a child run away from loving parents? So now Child Protective Services will investigate those parents. And once that child is in a residential facility, those are unlocked. They're unlocked here in California. They're unlocked in most states. And who hangs out in front of these places? Sex traffickers. And this is how they get their marks. Right now, pornography, the most watched pornography is transgender pornography. These kids are novelties, and you pump a little girl with testosterone and remove her breasts, and now you have, a fetish child that you can market. So it's really, really dark, and it's all tied together into sex trafficking, destruction of the family, and money. So what we do here in our duty is we highlight these bills, and we join forces with whoever will fight this. We don't care if they're a religious right group. We don't care if they're a radical feminist group. We link arms, because the only way we're going to be loud enough is if we all fight together. And when this is over, we can go into our separate corners, or maybe we'll actually learn from each other, which is my hope, is that we'll be more accepting and not silo ourselves anymore, and not be an us versus them anymore. So here in California, like I said, we've been testifying. We had probably 15 really nasty bills. And what gobsmacked us is we get 2 minutes. That's all we get to fight these bills, 2 minutes. And looking at the faces of these legislators, it's really clear to me that some are nefarious, some are evil and they know what they're doing. Others have no clue. It's like they're living under a rock. They have no clue about what is happening in the schools. They don't believe us when we tell them that there are transition closets in California where a kid can go to school in one outfit, change at school, put a dress on, spend the whole day in school dressed up as a female, change their clothes, and then go back home, and the parents are left in the dark. These legislators don't know that's happening. They don't know that CPS, Child Protective Services, is coming to visit parents if the parent doesn't affirm their child's gender identity. They don't know that these schools are giving out trans tape. This is tape that girls use to bind their breasts and boys use to tuck their genitals in between their legs. They don't know that this is happening. And it blows my mind that they're passing laws without knowing the facts. So it's a very important thing that people keep talking to lawmakers wherever they live, in whatever country, and start with the very basics. I always ask this question. 10 years ago, did you hear the word trans child? Did anybody hear that word trans child? Nobody did. Now, do you know someone who is a trans child, quote unquote? And they'll always say, yes, they do. And how many do you know? And that's the first opening to, there's something in the water, isn't there? And you have to start with the very, very basics. Explain to me how you can be born in the wrong body, how a sperm and an egg come together and make one human. How can you be born wrong? And this is where, the lesbians and the gay people need to come in, is then I explain most gay males thought they were girls when they were little. That's what they thought. And same with lesbians, playing with boy things. Maybe you're a boy, and putting and framing it in you're transitioning, you're doing the ultimate conversion therapy by telling gay kids that there's something wrong with them. And are you okay with that? And another fact I bring up is Iran. Iran, it's a death sentence if you're gay. So men transition. And all Americans, frown on that. What a horrible, brutal thing to do. But they're not seeing the fact that they're doing it to kids here in the United States or across the world. They're taking gay kids and transitioning them, saying that it's not okay to be gay. And these are entrance points, if you live in a very liberal state, to get them thinking about the kindness factor. You have to take whatever arguments they like. Discrimination, again, the bill about buy a baby. Whose bodies are they using to buy the babies or get the babies for free? They're using poor Hispanic women. You bring up racism, like this bill is actually racist. Same with the women who are beaten and there's no mandated reporting anymore. The police are not going to get involved. Who are the women in these abusive relationships? Who are these women walking the streets with pimps? A lot of times there are Black and brown women And so you push the argument, this is a racist bill. You have to take their arguments and flip them. It's the only way they can comprehend what they're actually doing. We've got a terribly frightening bill that is passing that will redefine what is in the best interest of the health, welfare, and safety of a child. Health, welfare, and safety are magical words in the US, and I'm sure elsewhere in the world. When you're deciding where a child, the custody of a child, or whether it's safe for a child to live even with their biological parents, they always look at health, welfare, and safety of the child. We have a bill passing that defines health, welfare, and safety of a child as gender affirmation. So a judge doesn't have discretion to give custody of a child to a parent who doesn't affirm that child's gender identity. And it doesn't matter how ridiculous that gender identity is. It could be autism gender. It could be demi boy. We even have a Prius gender, Toro, which is half man, half woman. The parent needs to affirm this. It doesn't matter if the child, how old the child is. The child could be 3. They need to affirm it. And then what does affirmation mean? It's undefined in our laws. Does it mean a haircut, a name and a pronoun, or does it mean you have to remove your daughter's breasts in order to be an affirming parent? We are rapidly moving in the blue states to laws that will force parents to transition their kids or lose custody of their children. That's what they want. That's where they're going. We are at a critical moment in time in the United States to fight this. Everyone needs to be fighting this, and everyone needs to be looking at the bills. And it's boring, but you have to look at the bills that are being proposed in your state. If the bill has something to do with mental health, that should be a red flag that this is a problem bill.
Is the Human Rights Campaign influencing politicians in California? Are they active there?
Yes, there's a group too called Equity California, and there's an Equity Florida, Equity Minnesota. Though that is the biggest lobby group with in any of the states, but HRC is massive. So HRC 10 years ago brought in, I think, about $9 million. Now they're up to $78 million. And their liabilities are only about $1 or $2 million. So what are they doing with that other $76 million? They are pushing politicians. And they're doing it. They're not doing it directly. I don't ever see HRC as a sponsor of a bill. I see the equity groups, Equity California. I see the GLSENs, GLADs, Gender Spectrum as supporters of these bills. But that money has to be pouring back into these politicians. It just has to be. There's just too much money out there, and everyone's getting a little piece of this.
We heard last week that the Equality and Diversity czar, or sort of promoter in Germany, has a budget of, I think it's 60 million euros a year. He's just got it to promote that. So it's possibly a similar thing, that some of that money will go in lobbying and encouraging lawmakers and decision makers to be positive to the changes. Yeah.
And they're funding. Remember how I talked about the residential facilities? So they're funding those, and so you have these kids graduating with gender studies, and they can't get jobs, so they give them jobs. They're funding mental health social workers. They're pouring money into them because these are the incubators. They're churning out indoctrinators, and then they're putting them in the schools, and then they're paying them through the schools. The tax dollars that are being spent on this are in the billions, and we don't even know it. There's a fund for $14 million in California for any, they call it TGI, transgender, gender nonconforming, intersex. There's not an intersex group that's getting any of this money. There's not a lesbian group that's getting this money. It's all the trans groups. We and I think this is illegal. I have to look at the law a little bit deeper, but we're spending $600,000 to start a fund, and then we're going to take donations, and HRC will donate, some of their millions. And California is going to have a advertising blitz in other states.
Wow, spreading it.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not enough to do it in California. And of course, they're targeting they target the red states, and they target rural areas. Please reach out to me and join. And in any state, actually, reach out to me at Erin.Friday@Yahoo, and I'll put you on the calls to action. There's a call to action that goes out to the US group, and then there's calls to action that goes out to the California groups. Everyone is anonymous. I am the only one who sees anybody's email. I'm the only one who can send out an email. So it's not going to be, you're not going to have flooded emails. It's once a month, twice a month, but it will, sometimes it's a one-click campaign, and I steal from WDI. Thank you. I forward out your campaigns. But if anybody wants to join the calls to action, I'll never know if you did it. I'll never know. And if you don't agree with the call to action, you don't have to do it. And like I said, there's no shame in not doing it. I hope you do all of them. It would be amazing. Because there is a wave right now. There is a momentum here in the US. We're finally sort of catching up to the UK, but there is a wave, and we need to fight even faster and harder. So please, Erin.Friday@Yahoo, that's my personal account. I have no problem sharing it. Go to ourduty.group for simple fact sheets about gender ideology. If you don't know what to say, if you don't know the stats, learn them. We always have to be completely correct when we're in our arguments. So please use our website. And I wanted to say just thank you. Thank you for all you amazing women. Thank you.
Now we're going to go on to talking with Bernadette O Malley, who is WDI UK country contact, and also the tech behind all of these webinars for the last year and a half, or we don't even know how long it's been going on. It's been doing tech. So welcome, Bernadette. We thought we want to show how to run this global platform, and Bernadette's going to do that, but we thought we'd have a quick chat about how Zoom or other sort of internet platforms can be useful for international networking. So Bernadette, we thought we'd just go back to how it started. How did we work out to do these?
And how we met. We met on the streets, protesting and handing out leaflets. So kind of knew from the start, didn't we, that we would kind of get on and try and rock things together. So
yeah, so that's, I mean, that's interesting. We were doing fair play for women. We were trying to fight against the self-ID law in Britain, and fair play for women had got leaflets to hand out. So we met through a mutual friend who said we should go into Watford, near where we live, and hand out leaflets. And then she showed up once, and then it turned out it was only us. And Layla and Darkin. There were not many of us, were there?
No, there wasn't, but it didn't really matter. I mean, I remember you were really good. You would talk to people and convince people. You see, this is the difference between you and me. You're really good at all the talking, and I just handed out loads and loads of leaflets because just that was the functional thing to do. So that was my side of it. Whereas you're really good at talking to people and persuading people and that side of things. So
yeah. Well, it was fun, and then what we thought, we started talking about well, we stayed in touch, didn't we? And we were the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights had been launched, and it was launched at a couple of meetings, one in New York and then one in Leeds hosted by Leeds Spinners. And then how did we decide to do webinars? And we're sort of sharing this partly because other women might decide to do the same thing.
Yeah, I think we decided, I think COVID probably as well, and Zoom was coming up, and there wasn't many women, and they were spread. So I think there was a way of trying to get it together, women in our area, to have a meeting. And I think we went to somebody else's meeting, and then we just carried on having meetings, just you and I talking over Zoom, because we couldn't really get together. And you decided to go with a webinar, and your theory was make it regular, make it consistent, and so that women would know where we were and would find us. So we built the mountain and people came.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen so people can see what our first webinar was. This is our first webinar that we did, which was we had it was on the 28th of October 2019. And we had already organised WDI. We were an organisation, and Sheila Jeffries had co-authored the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, and she agreed to speak on men's sexual rights versus women's sex-based rights. So that was our first talk. And we also, our second speaker on our very first webinar, which was in April the 20th, 2021. So that was near the beginning of COVID as well. We were in lockdown, was Vaishnavi Sundar, who did India, women's sex-based rights in India. And then the week after that, the 25th of April, I don't know why it was that, well, anyway, let's say it was that, we had Eugenia Rodriguez from Brazil, Amparo Domingo from Spain, Maria Benetti from Argentina, and Kate Harris from the LGB Alliance, Catherine Lamont from Australia, and Kesnia Korjic from Croatian Radical Feminist Organization and the country contact for Croatia. So I'll stop sharing, and you can see that we've been going ever since. So that's 2021. So more than 3 years we've been doing now, apart from a couple of like holiday breaks.
Yeah. And now the webinars are in multiple languages, which is really good. And people, hopefully women are going on to the channel to see. We have French one today, German and Spanish.
Yeah, and some in Portuguese sometimes. And I suppose if you haven't done webinars, just to know that if you are a country contact, then you could use the Zoom platform that we've got for webinars. If you want to set up some webinars in your language or just local to your area, because there's also Australian and New Zealand webinars, then do get in touch, because we can share the resources, the infrastructure that WDI have for you to be able to run webinars. And our first ones, we had about, say, maybe I think we had 32 people coming to our first one, and then gradually the word got out. And then the really good thing is recording them, and if you can put them on YouTube, which we do, because the very first one we've got has had over 5,000 views, and then some of them have more than that, but many of them have over 200 views and some into the thousands. So it means it's a really good way of recording ideas and then sharing them. And it also means we quite often hear from people who binge watch. They would just watch the whole of WDI videos, which is a great introduction to the ideas.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much any subject that's come up in this argument, we have had women from different parts of the globe discussing it. So I think our resource, the WDI resource, is a massive encyclopedia of information, which it's a bit of a...
And it means you don't have to travel to meet people, that we can communicate internationally. I think that's a big thing, isn't it? Yeah. So Bernadette, you're going to show women how to use the platform, the global platform, and we're going to put this This will be available as a standalone video, how to use the global platform, but it's only available to members of WDI. So if you're an activist or a donor, and if you're not yet registered as a member, if you promote the declaration, then we'll make you one. But we need to make sure that we know women if they're going to use this platform. So I'm going to turn myself off and over to you,
yep.
Bernadette.
Okay. As Joe mentioned before, so if you're a country contact and you want to actually run a webinar, then we have the infrastructure to facilitate that for you. And a webinar is very different from a meeting. And what we have available for all members of WDI is the facility to hold a meeting at any time of the day. So globally, this platform that I'm going to talk about is open. And what it is it's a Zoom meeting area, and anyone can go onto it that has the codes and the information. So I've actually got, if you've signed the declaration and you've become a member, you contact uk@womensdeclaration.org. I'm going to just share my screen, and I will send you this document that I'm going to show you now. It's a PDF. So basically, there is a Zoom meeting platform that is always open and that you can get the codes to use it. Okay, so what you do is you will be given the codes that you can go in and you put it in just like normal, just like this one. You go into Zoom, you go into the meeting area. It will tell you that this meeting area is for women only, and it is not monitored at all. The only thing I've done is I've got audio in the main area only, and that's really only in case maybe there's some disagreement. Or a couple of years ago, somebody just said to me, I think a man's voice was heard, and somebody had got hold of the codes. And it was when they did the plays, and unfortunately the codes got out onto Twitter, so we had to change them all. But I went on and had a listen. So these are automatically deleted after 3 days. So if you have an issue, you have to get hold of me quite quickly through uk@womensdeclaration.org to tell me. Otherwise, they're all automatically deleted. So that's, you just have to say you've got it. That'll come up. So now you'll be in, any of you who are in the breakout rooms, you'll understand this. You initially go into like a lobby area. And if you're the only group on the platform, if there's nobody else there in the meeting, then you can have your meeting in that lobby area. That's not a problem at all. But if you go on to that, if you go into the meeting and there's already another group there, we have the facility to, just like in the breakout rooms, to open up the meeting into, there's about 20 breakout rooms that you can open up. But you can only do that if you are a host. And because this is open all the time, there's like the facility to have a roaming host, so to speak. So you don't have to go into the meeting. Anyone can go into the platform with the meeting details. You don't need to be the host. You don't need to have set up the meeting. It's always there waiting for people to join. So you can just go in and you'll just be a participant. The problem then is that if you want to open the breakout rooms, you have to be a host. So you have to kind of claim host. All right. And you'll be given, if you want to start using this platform, you will be sent this document. So don't worry if it's kind of going a bit too quickly now. And I'm always around if you have any questions anyway. So basically, there'll be this button called Claim Host. And you get that, it's at the bottom of the participants little pop-up window that comes up. So this is participants, yeah. Click on this. This bit comes up on the right, and in Claim Host. This is for a PC, a laptop. If you're on a phone or something like that, you might not be able to do this. So you then put in the code. This obviously is not the code. And you claim the host. There you go. So now you're a host. It'll have host against your name. All of a sudden you have breakout rooms available, and then you can open the breakout rooms. The only caveat to this is that if you do create a host in your meeting and another meeting is in there, you will see that you can then end the whole session. And what it will do is it will just shut the Zoom meeting and people will have to rejoin. So always, if you are a host and there's another meeting going on, make sure you transfer the host across to somebody else who's still going on and having their meeting. So you click the breakout rooms and there's all these breakout rooms and you can go in to them. Okay. There is one thing that you have to remember when you open breakout rooms is if you just open them without allowing people to go into whichever rooms they want to, the default is you have to move everyone into an assigned room, and you don't want to be doing that. So what you must remember to do is before you open the breakout rooms, you go into this option button. Again, as I said, I will send you this document. You have to click on the allow participants here, so everyone can move themselves around however they want. And then you just start the breakout rooms. Okay, if you forget to do this, it doesn't matter because the breakout rooms don't appear to everyone else. So it's not like you've made some great major issue. Nobody else will be able to see the breakout rooms because the default is that you move them. So you just close them and do it again. So it really isn't a problem. And then the other thing is transferring the host. So again, in this document, it will take you through how to do that. And there you go. I think that's it. Right, I'm going to stop sharing now. So it's this meeting area is always there for women all over the globe. It doesn't shut. If you've got the codes for it, you can go on it. And if you have any issues, contact me and I will help you. Just a quick thing from a question that came up was like, if you've got the links, can you just go on the platform at any time? And the answer is yes. So I would recommend anyone who is currently using the platform for actual meetings, or if women want to have an actual meeting, that they always claim the host and open up the breakout rooms and go into a breakout room. And obviously then etiquette will be, if you just randomly go onto the platform looking for some women chatting or for a social, that you do not interrupt a meeting that is going on in a specific breakout room.
So we're just going to go to our last speaker now, who is Nina from Canada. And the title of Nina's talk is So Much for Work-Life Balance in Canada, A. And Nina was a volunteer in the 1990s in gay and lesbian organisations. She's worked for 7 federal government departments, reading and applying legislation, and is going to talk to us about the situation in Canada and other things. So thank you so much, Nina. Tell us what you found out.
Well, firstly, I'll start just briefly with the 1990s and volunteering. I was at the Vancouver Women's Health Collective, the Lesbian Avengers, and most importantly, the Vancouver newspaper Angles. This published from 1980 until 2004. It began as the Gay and Lesbian newspaper, and this is the December 1992 issue where bisexual was added. And bisexual, so the paper published from 1980 till 2004, bisexual was added in 1992, and I achieved this by bringing up the issue in very many meetings. It was starting to be discussed in the gay press and the Washington Blade in particular, and the phrase lesbi-gay was adopted. Bisexuals were deemed sexual tourists. They were not illegal in law. They were only criminally charged in Canada if they were caught with gays and lesbians. And so over 3 months of discussing bisexual, I had a number of gay men admit to me that they confessed that they were bisexual, and I was accused of being bisexual. So at a meeting where it was a lesbian's turn to chair and I was the only lesbian on the collective, I pointed out that if we did not add bisexual explicitly, I would be required to name names and remove men from the voting collective, and then we would not have quorum and we would not even have an issue to publish that month. So the gay men could not vote fast enough to add bisexual to the masthead. And there was a page 1 feature article that was written, And this was the first time an article was ever asked to be reprinted by another newspaper. The University of Victoria reprinted the bisexual article because this is when it was first really being talked about. Now, I later left the paper because I was the only lesbian with gay men and bisexual men, and I tried to find lesbians. And it was my understanding later that when trans was added, it was done not by a collective vote. The trans volunteer could not get everyone to agree because we knew this was a fetish and self-loathing. And so it ended up being added before the paper finished by the trans person simply offered to take the camera-ready art to the press, and after everyone else left, simply made the change throughout the magazine, and then it could not be undone. Angles ultimately finally finished publishing in 2004 because the Toronto newspaper Extra had tried to do a deal with Angles, which the collective didn't actually discuss, and because it was not told to us by the one guy, the one gay man who was sort of in charge of Angles. He was there from Angles from the entire run of the paper. He was the only volunteer who was there the entire time. And so the city was not big enough for there to be two newspapers, and Extra West at its peak published in Toronto. It published Extra West in Vancouver. It published Island Extra in Vancouver Island, Calgary Extra, and then Ottawa Extra. In 1994, when the International Gay and Lesbian Association, which was the first non-government group to have United Nations advisory status, was told by the United Nations, of your 168 organizations, 30 of them are pedophile groups. You cannot be a human rights advisor if you support pedophiles. So those groups were kicked out, and another 20 groups, significantly including Extra in Toronto, quit the organization in support of the pedophiles. Extra West's then lesbian editor, Cindy Filipenko, wrote an anti-NAMBLA editorial and was fired. Horrifyingly, Ken Popert was the man in Extra who fired her, and he was partners with Brian Mossop, who was a federal government employee who ended up being the case in Canada that led to gay and lesbian employees no longer being purged from the federal government and getting eventually same benefits as heterosexual employees. So for me, after I was out of the volunteering, I was working in the nonprofit sector, and then I got a job at a small law office. And then I ended up working in the federal government in the post-Brian Mossop era. The government of Canada from the 1950s until 1992 was purging the public service of gay and lesbian employees under the Government Security Act, because as gays and lesbians, we were a blackmailable security risk because we couldn't be government employees. So there was that. I then became a government employee in 1998. My first department of 7 was Revenue Canada. And Revenue Canada rolled out, well, the entire government rolled out a diversity program. And diversity was said to avoid saying the words gay and lesbian. And the Employment Equity Act, which I talked about in my previous WDI talk, covered women, visible minority, disabled, and Indigenous. The employment equity groups did not want there to be a 5th category added because they didn't want the budget divided by 5. And they feared the gay and lesbian group would outperform them, which at Revenue Canada did in fact happen. The other 4 groups basically were, at 3 of the groups, men were at the table and women made the coffee. And in the women's group, the white women were at the table and all the other women made the coffee. And also you could only pick one category. So if you were a woman who could fall into more categories, you had to pick one. Whereas when the Gay and Lesbian Committee met, and we had to fight for 3 months to not have support in the name of the committee, we all brought our own lattes and worked across the table. We actually were the first government group to march in the Vancouver Pride Parade, and we were terrified to be out to the community because we were not there looking for votes or money. We were not technically a community group, and it took us a while to realize we represented hope and being actually part of Canada, because
And what year was this? I know you've said, but will you remind-
1998. It was also the first year the Vancouver Pride Parade was broadcast on regional television. Now, in government, I was the only one out for my first 6 departments. I met other gays and lesbians and bisexuals, and even at one department, a man who was dressing as a woman as trans. And honestly, everyone just had this pretend it's normal, weird thing that was being directed there, whereas there was absolute denial of gays and lesbians. So it was the government of Canada for a long time. I had in my HR, I was common law partnered, and at Industry Canada, my third department, I actually got married, and then Canada's marriage law happened in 2003, and the government of Canada had a one-time in your career 1-week marriage leave code. So if you weren't married, it was obviously just for heterosexuals for a long time. And after 2003 and marriage equality, the union actually gave away that marriage leave code, and they changed it to a generic, everyone gets 1 week for whatever reason they want. So I was actually at one department able to get that one-time only leave to get married. And then when they replaced the code at the same department, I got that leave again, only this time I used it because my dog had surgery. And in 2000, so Revenue Canada was my first department. Then I worked at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And this is an actual RCMP forage cap. The badge has been removed. And this is a possible whistleblowing thing because the government security policy prevents government employees from talking about secret government stuff. But the Stephen Harper government passed another law restricting civil service from talking about their workplace in a much more substantial way that I have not been trained on, because by the time that passed, I was already had my career ended by Transport Canada. So I was not an RCMP officer. I have never worn this hat outside of the house. And I will share the story of how I acquired this hat now, and this will be probably whistleblowing. I was at lunch at RCMP headquarters, and I was the only person in the room who did not have a uniform or a gun. And there was a very butch corporal who everybody pretended was not a butch corporal. And so she said at lunch, "Nina, you keep saying you want a forage cap. Why don't you just go to Depot and get the whole uniform?" So I quickly looked around the room to make sure nobody had food or a drink about to go in their mouth. And I said, "It's really more of a fetish than a lifestyle thing for me." And that was totally a joke. And everybody just sort of stopped and just gasped and was shocked. But there was one male corporal who he did something I didn't know the human body could do. He blushed so hard from his diaphragm that he just turned instantly red that I actually refer to it as a Rocky Horror Picture Show wipe. And then the next day, I got an email from the butch corporal asking me to go up to her office. And she said, "I have been given permission to give you this hat so you never make that joke again." So I also worked at the Immigration and Refugee Board, which is the only time I ever shared a link that had any effect. I saw an article about UN aid workers who were molesting children instead of providing them food and aid. And I printed the article, and I was working at Immigration and Refugee Board, and there was a United Nations office that was embedded in the Refugee Board. And I went to that office, knocked on the door, and I heard the woman hiding inside her office, and I pushed the article under her door. And she showed up at my workstation a couple hours later to tell me that she had a feeling it was me when she heard the knock, and that she's now phoned New York and let them know. That was 2009. That story repeats in the news every 2 to 3 years. So this is where I become not surprised in a way that the UN is now promoting pedophiles in terms of the queer theory. Now, in terms of working in government and having legislation that then you need to apply, and my job was to read legislation and create forms so that other people could apply it in their jobs. So to take an idea like gender ID, which is a sexual self-image, and try to give that the force of law, is to do the exact opposite of what the Magna Carta did in the first place, which was to create a commonly understood law that was not at the whim of the monarch. And gender ID allows anybody to self-ID and not only void the rights of others, but void the protected rights of others. And the Canadian Charter of Rights gave women direct rights access to language and own ideas, and the freedom from discrimination. And self-ID was allowed to undermine employment equity. When I worked at Indian Northern Affairs, I hope this one will really get me in trouble with the Department of Justice. There was a man who kept saying he was Indigenous, and he kept changing the generation this alleged grandmother was. And one day he went that even too far and claimed she was a princess. So I asked him if she was from the Disney tribe. I lost my job because of being a lesbian and an atheist, and I was discriminated as a woman across 7 departments, with Department 7, Transport Canada, being the worst, to where I am actually named in the manager's handbook to the Canada Labor Code Part 2 as the example of workplace bullying managers can get away with. They actually removed me from the workplace with Vancouver City Police and took me to St. Paul's Hospital, a religious-run religious hospital, and held me for 3 hours without charter rights. I couldn't sign myself out. And I have not had rights in Canada ever since. And I have gone through the BC Police Complaints Commission, the Federal Human Rights, and I was self-represented at the Federal Court and the Federal Appeals Court. I have filed the paperwork for the Supreme Court, and I'm continuing to wait for a file number. And in the meantime, I have done everything I can from my positions of responsibility that I once upon a time had, including writing to former Governor General Julie Payette and telling her to resign, and telling her staff if she was a bully that they need to file grievances, which they duly did. And Julie Payette is the first Governor General of Canada to ever resign.
And you're pretty active now, having, with all this experience and understanding of what goes on inside these institutions. Are you active in trying to sort of lobby or change the laws? Or yes. I mean, I know you're really active in WDI, yeah.
Yes, I have been also directly in contact with there used to be a status of women in Canada, which the Harper government removed equality and then defunded that department from 17 offices to 5. And then that caused the massive defunding of women's nonprofit groups across Canada. And then after that, the trans lobby swooped in and human rights complained against women. And it was not, it's not women who were doing the murdering and harm. And it's very, very telling to me that even the men who self-ID as women are not saying men are murdering us, partly because they are seeking out their murderers for sexual thrill. So, as a lesbian, my suggestion to men who self-ID as women is, if you don't want to get murdered, stop having sex with men. It worked for us, right? So it's really quite ridiculous, but gender ID caters to a sexual self-image, and it denies ordinary human senses. If there's such a thing as a trans soul, there would be a trans body. Mammals do not change sex, and we do not self-impregnate. That gets to be for reptiles and fish. That's not something that mammals can continue to do. Little wrap up. After I became disability retired because of PTSD, I tried to find a place I had to go volunteer. So I returned to the Vancouver Women's Health Collective in 2021. I discovered that they are now having men there. They have makeup mirrors for drag queens, and all of the work of the collective from the 1970s, the medical information translated across languages, and the referral service for all the women's nonprofits across the province has been destroyed, shredded, gone. That's a hate crime under the world level court. That is beyond going after women. That was destroying the archive history and all the work of the organization. It was the one place women could go to get help with their doctors against the BC College, and also get medical information and support. And now there's makeup mirrors for drag queens.
Okay, so we're going to go now to our next speaker, who is Annie-Ève COLLIN. And it's a video that we're going to play that was recorded last week at the French WDI Women's Declaration International webinar.
et bienvenue au webinaire en langue française du WDI, l'organisation mondiale qui défend les droits des femmes basés sur le sexe, parce que les femmes subissent des violences en fonction de leur sexe et non pas en raison d'un sentiment intime qu'elles auraient d'être des femmes. C'est pour cette raison que le WDI est à l'origine de la Déclaration des droits des femmes basée sur le sexe, déclaration qui compte déjà 35 000 signataires à travers le monde, et ce chiffre augmente de 200 signatures par semaine. Nous vous invitons bien sûr à signer cette déclaration à votre tour si ce n'est déjà fait. Aujourd'hui, nous recevons Annie-Ève COLLIN. C'est une philosophe qui fait d'excellentes vidéos de vulgarisation sur les débats philosophiques actuels sur sa chaîne YouTube. Elle est héritière des Lumières et son approche est rationaliste. Elle est curieuse et intéressée par la façon de penser des autres. C'est ce qui l'a amenée à bien étudier la pensée postmoderne qu'elle décrit et décrypte très bien dans une série de vidéos sur sa chaîne. Elle est féministe, mais le noyau de sa critique de l'idéologie du genre, c'est que cette idéologie repose sur des affirmations fausses et qu'elle est illogique. Annie-Ève fait aussi malheureusement partie de ces femmes victimes de l'intolérance et de la violence des activistes de la cancel culture. Vous pouvez poser des questions dans l'application questions-réponses de Zoom. Bonjour Annie-Ève. Est-ce que pour commencer, tu peux commencer par nous dire qu'est-ce qui t'a amené à critiquer l'idéologie queer et comment est-ce que tu l'as rencontrée?
Bonjour Marie, bonjour à toutes. Alors, comment ça a commencé? J'ai suivi des cours de sociologie du genre à l'Université de Montréal. J'ai eu comme professeur Gabrielle Richard. Et bon, j'arrivais là en tant que personne intéressée par le féminisme. Le cours s'appelait « Rapport de genre et sexualité ». Alors, je m'attendais à entendre parler de sexisme, de rapport entre les hommes et les femmes. Alors, c'est particulièrement quand il a été question de l'idéologie queer que j'ai été un peu étonnée par ce que j'entendais et par ce que je lisais. Alors, l'idéologie queer, Marie a parlé d'idéologie du genre, c'est essentiellement la même chose. L'idéologie queer présente les catégories comme ayant été imposées socialement. On parle notamment des catégories femmes et hommes, féminin, masculin, homosexuel, hétérosexuel. Ce seraient des catégories qu'il faut déconstruire parce qu'elles relèveraient de l'oppression. Et il faudrait que chacun, chacune puisse s'autodéfinir, s'autodéterminer. Et on veut même éviter de donner des définitions claires. On peut continuer d'utiliser des mots entre guillemets, je dirais. Mais le queer, ce serait celui qui refuse les catégories que la société veut lui imposer et qui définit, chacun devrait finalement pouvoir définir le sens des mots qu'il utilise pour se décrire, pour se définir par lui-même. Alors, moi, en tant que personne qui avait une formation en philosophie, qui l'enseignait depuis déjà un moment, assez vite, j'ai réagi à ça parce que c'est élémentaire en philosophie de définir clairement les mots qu'on emploie, parce que c'est comme ça qu'on arrive à communiquer efficacement, c'est comme ça qu'on arrive à se faire comprendre. Et en fait, philosophie ou non, c'est quand même à ça que servent les mots. Puis, petite parenthèse ici, ceux qui endossent consciemment ou non l'idéologie queer, quand je dis consciemment ou non, c'est il y a ceux qui en font la promotion, mais il y a ceux aussi qui écoutent des militants, puis qui sont simplement, ils veulent avec bonne foi défendre les droits des groupes minoritaires. Ceci dit, on peut tout à fait être pour les droits de tous les humains sans endosser l'idéologie queer. On peut parfaitement être pour les droits des homosexuels, bisexuels, trans, sans endosser l'idéologie queer. Mais un contre-argument qu'ils vont souvent amener, c'est qu'un mot peut avoir plus qu'un sens et que je serais en train de nier que les mots peuvent avoir des significations variables. Ce n'est pas ça que je nie. ils ne font pas la différence entre un mot peut avoir une signification différente selon le contexte et un mot veut dire quelque chose de différent pour chaque personne. Ce n'est pas du tout la même chose. Prenez le mot drôle. Drôle, ça veut dire que ça fait rire. Mais si je vous dis on m'a raconté une drôle d'histoire, ça peut vouloir dire l'histoire est bizarre. Mais c'est pas parce que le mot change de sens selon mes caprices, c'est vraiment le contexte. Donc, bref, il y a une confusion sur l'usage du langage qui rend l'idéologie queer, qui fait en sorte qu'elle jette la confusion sur la possibilité de communiquer. Puis, j'avais fait remarquer à la professeure pendant la pause que si on veut éviter les étiquettes, c'est ça l'idéologie queer, on voudrait éviter les étiquettes femme, homme, masculin, féminin, ce serait des étiquettes, ce serait donc opprimant. Mais si on veut éviter les étiquettes, il va falloir s'arrêter de parler. Queer, qu'est-ce que c'est si ce n'est pas une autre étiquette? Et quand ils imposent l'étiquette cisgenre à la majorité des gens, qu'est-ce que c'est d'autre qu'une étiquette? Donc, je voyais des contradictions, il y a quelque chose qui ne fonctionne pas à la base dans cette idéologie-là. Alors ça, c'est vraiment comment ça a commencé. Quand j'ai suivi un cours universitaire qui était, moi, j'arrivais là avec aucun a priori. C'est un cours qui était destiné plutôt à nous faire endosser l'idéologie du genre et l'idéologie queer. Et c'est comme ça que j'ai commencé à en être critique. Alors, ceux qui veulent dire que c'est la faute des conservateurs ou des féministes radicales qui exercent une mauvaise influence, non. Ceux qui endossent l'idéologie queer font du très bon travail par eux-mêmes pour montrer qu'il y a des failles dans leur vision des choses. Sinon, je vous raconte comment j'ai atteint ce que les anglophones appellent mon peak trance. Alors, ce qu'on appelle le peak trance, c'est moi, à la base, comme probablement la majorité des gens qui m'écoutent, si on m'avait demandé est-ce que tu es pour les droits des personnes trans, j'aurais dit, mais évidemment, qui serait contre ça? Le peak trance, c'est quand quelqu'un qui était à la base sympathique à la cause, à force de voir des contradictions ou des exagérations, en vient à s'opposer à ce qu'on appelle le mouvement transactiviste ou à s'opposer à l'idéologie queer. Moi, c'est arrivé très vite, en fait. J'étais membre d'un groupe Facebook féministe. Puis, il y avait beaucoup de publications qui portaient sur les trans, sur la transition ou sur d'autres questions liées au transgenrisme. Et il y a une membre, une internaute, qui a posté une question. Elle a demandé si le sujet du groupe, c'était le féminisme ou les trans, parce qu'elle suivait le groupe pour entendre parler de féminisme. Et elle s'est fait répondre, bien, comme c'est un groupe féministe, on parle de toutes les femmes, à moins que tu sois en train de dire que les femmes trans ne sont pas des femmes, ça voudrait dire que tu es transphobe. Alors moi, spontanément, j'ai vu qu'il y a quelque chose qui cloche là-dedans. Effectivement, une personne qui est un homme, qui voudrait être une femme, ce n'est pas la même chose qu'une femme. Et les soucis qu'on risque d'avoir, les discriminations qu'on risque de vivre ou les problèmes qu'on peut avoir à régler ou qu'on doit faire reconnaître socialement ne seront pas les mêmes. Ce sont deux questions distinctes. Alors, à ce moment-là, il y a vraiment eu, ça a été un point de rupture pour moi. Il y a quelque chose, à ce moment-là, je me suis dit, il y a quelque chose qui cloche, puis il y a aussi quelque chose de... Il y a une forme d'intimidation dans le fait de répondre à cet internaute-là. Ah ben, si tu remets ça en question, que ce soit un sujet pour le féminisme, ça veut dire que tu as une phobie. C'est un peu, c'est gros de dire qu'elle a une phobie parce qu'elle soulève cette question-là. Et finalement, un autre élément dans les débuts de mon parcours comme gender critical, c'est quand j'ai fait la connaissance de Diane Guilbeault, une grande féministe malheureusement décédée il y a quelques années, qui était une membre très active de Pour les droits des femmes du Québec. C'est elle qui m'avait invitée à me joindre à Pour les droits des femmes du Québec et je m'étais jointe à leur assemblée annuelle. Diane Guilbeault avait expliqué, c'était avant que le projet de loi C16 passe, c'est-à-dire avant que l'identité de genre et l'expression de genre soient ajoutées au motif de discrimination interdit dans la Charte canadienne des droits et libertés. Puis, Diane Guilbeault faisait valoir que le danger, c'est de remplacer le sexe par l'identité de genre, parce que le sexe, ça compte. Et ce n'est pas parce que quelqu'un se sent femme, ça, j'attends encore qu'on m'explique ce que c'est censé vouloir dire, se sentir femme. Mais ce n'est pas parce qu'on sent qu'on est quelque chose qu'on l'est. Être une femme, c'est une réalité anatomique concrète avec toutes sortes d'implications concrètes. Et si ça ne peut plus être pris en compte institutionnellement, ça fait une série de reculs pour les droits des femmes. Ça cause des problèmes aux femmes. Puis, ici aussi, je voudrais faire une parenthèse. L'homme et la femme ne sont pas des constructions sociales. Ce sont des réalités biologiques. Ceci dit, même si c'était des constructions sociales, ce n'est pas parce que quelque chose relève du social qu'il suffit de s'y identifier subjectivement pour en être. Prenez la police, c'est une construction sociale. Il n'y a personne qui est biologiquement policier. N'empêche que moi, si je dis que je m'identifie comme policière, je ne suis toujours pas policière. C'est-à-dire que même si on admettait un changement de sens des mots femme et homme, et qu'on en faisait des rôles sociaux plutôt que des réalités biologiques, on serait encore capable d'identifier des critères qui permettent d'identifier objectivement qui est un homme et qui est une femme. Donc, bref, essentiellement, c'est comme ça que je suis devenue critique de l'idéologie queer. Il y a d'autres facteurs qui se sont ajoutés ensuite, mais les facteurs d'influence dans les tout débuts, ça a été les cours que j'ai suivis avec Gabrielle Richard et d'écouter la féministe Diane Guilbeault.
Merci. Et du coup, aujourd'hui, concrètement, c'est quoi qui te pose particulièrement problème dans cette idéologie queer?
Alors là, je sais que je m'adresse à des féministes qui ont certainement à cœur les reculs pour les droits des femmes qui surviennent à cause de cette idéologie-là. Moi aussi, je trouve ça très important, mais quant à moi, c'est un dommage collatéral du problème fondamental de cette idéologie-là. Et son problème fondamental, c'est qu'elle est mensongère et incohérente. Quand on substitue la fausseté à la vérité, ça ne peut faire que des problèmes. Ça a toujours des conséquences, même si on ne les prévoit pas toujours immédiatement. Il y a toujours des conséquences négatives au fait de substituer la fausseté à la vérité. Et quand on le fait volontairement, autrement dit, quand on ment, les conséquences négatives risquent d'être encore pires parce que quand on le fait volontairement, ça veut dire qu'on n'est pas enclin à corriger les faussetés quand on nous présente des preuves que ce qu'on a affirmé était faux. Alors là, il faut bien comprendre que le langage n'est pas un acte isolé. Quand on dit quelque chose, ce n'est pas un acte isolé. Vous savez, on se fait dire, mais qu'est-ce que ça peut bien changer si quelqu'un dit qu'il est une femme? Pourquoi ne pas lui dire qu'il est une femme, l'appeler madame? Ça ne change rien. Oui, ça change quelque chose parce que ce qu'on dit a un lien avec ce qu'on fait, avec ce qu'on s'engage à faire et avec ce que les autres vont faire parce que les autres ajustent leur comportement en fonction des informations qu'on leur donne. Alors, donner des informations mensongères à quelqu'un, c'est l'inciter à agir en fonction d'une mauvaise perception du réel et il risque donc de prendre des mauvaises décisions. Alors, l'idéologie queer, écoutez, c'est vraiment mensonger parce que on veut nous faire prendre des hommes pour des femmes pour des hommes, nous faire admettre que certains humains ne sont ni l'un ni l'autre, et ici on ne parle même pas des humains intersexués. Et là, ils vont dire que le sens d'un mot peut évoluer ou que le sens d'un mot peut varier d'un contexte à l'autre. Alors, dire qu'une femme trans est une femme, la fameuse phrase, ils vont dire ce n'est pas un mensonge si on comprend le mot femme dans un sens lié à la notion de genre et non à la notion de sexe. Mais en réalité, ils ont beau marteler que le mot femme n'a pas le sens qu'on lui prête traditionnellement, c'est-à-dire humain de sexe féminin. Ils vont nous dire que ce n'est pas ce que veut dire le mot femme ou que ce n'est pas nécessairement ça qu'il veut dire ou que ce n'est plus ce qu'il veut dire. Mais on n'a encore jamais vu de définition alternative. Quand on demande, OK, pouvez-vous nous définir le mot femme? Si ça ne veut pas dire un humain adulte, techniquement, de sexe féminin, alors que veut dire ce mot-là? Il n'y a jamais eu de définition alternative. Et on veut vraiment imposer à la société de confirmer que des hommes sont des femmes au sens parfaitement traditionnel de ce terme-là et à les traiter comme tels. La preuve, il faudrait qu'on admette ces hommes dans les sports féminins, par exemple. Mais s'il y a des sports pour femmes, c'est en fonction des différences entre les sexes. C'est en fonction de la définition traditionnelle du mot femme. Alors, s'il y avait vraiment un nouveau terme, une nouvelle façon d'utiliser le mot femme, on pourrait sans problème dire OK, alors peut-être que dans certains contextes, la nouvelle définition s'applique, mais dans le sport, il faut revenir à la définition basée sur le sexe. Mais non, ce n'est pas accepté par les militants queer. Ce n'est pas accepté par les transactivistes. Vous pouvez penser à d'autres contextes dans lesquels le sexe compte, comme les vestiaires, par exemple, ou encore dans les relations sexuelles. Quelqu'un qui est attiré par les femmes, ça veut généralement dire qu'il est attiré par des personnes de sexe féminin et non par une identité de genre.